Hello, everyone. My name is Charles Alexander. I'm the Associate Vice Provost for Student Diversity and Director of the Academic Advancement Program. And I'd like to welcome you to this program this afternoon. And it's a great pleasure. It's an honor to be amongst our distinguished guests today. And I just want to thank them personally for being present and sharing their remarks. As you know or don't know, this is panel event as part of our AAP's 50th anniversary celebration and distinguished speaker series. It's a monthly speaker series that started in January and will resume until the end of the year as we commemorate and celebrate our anniversary, our 50th anniversary at UCLA. As you know, as I mentioned, celebrating 50 years at UCLA, a program that promotes access, equity, and excellence for all students. It's been an honor for me to direct and lead. AAP continues to set the stage in addressing the low number of historically underrepresented, low-income, and diverse students, while also continuing to honor its mission in helping every student in need to succeed. Celebrating 50 years is a milestone that we hope you will join us at some of our future Distinguished Speaker Series events and some of our programs that we're going to have throughout the year. But today, we would like to utilize this time with you to acquaint our UCLA community with the people from UCLA and from our UCLA community and doing some really incredible things. You'll hear perspectives from a student, from an alum, from a faculty member, and an administrator, particularly since the media's attention has been capturing the anti-Asian violence that's been going on in our country. We understand this has been a challenging time in the AAPI community, and we offer this afternoon a time to reflect, to see the work that members of our community are doing around this event, and even answer some of your questions later on in the program during the Q&A. I'd like to mention that in collaboration with the Asian American Studies, the Institute for American Culture, UCLA Athletics, and the Arthur Ashe Legacy Project, we hope this event will inspire you to pursue service, scholarship, and sportsmanship in your life and in your community. The Arthur Ashe Legacy at UCLA exists to preserve, educate, and create awareness around Arthur Ashe's legacy and values, which are relevant today more than ever. So I'm also happy to acknowledge the significant role of Dr. Patricia Turner, Professor of African American Studies and our current director of the Arthur Ashe Legacy at UCLA. It was her vision, her connections, and her work behind the scenes that helped make this event possible today. What I'd like to do is briefly introduce each of the speakers because we want to go right into the dialogue and the conversation that we're going to have today, and to give them enough time and the audience enough time to ask questions. We have some really incredible people. Our controller, Betty Yee, State Controller Betty Yee, I'd like to welcome her. She's the only 10th woman in the California history to be elected statewide to office. She's been our controller since 2015, following 2 terms of service on the State Board of Equalization. As the state's chief fiscal officer, she continues her service on the Board of Equalization. She chairs the Franchise Tax Board, is a member of the boards for the California Public Employees Retirement System and the California Teachers Retirement System, and serves on the State Land Commission, where she has been a champion of environmental justice. She's been a long supporter and committed to supporting women and others from diverse communities to pursue careers in public service. She's a native of San Francisco. She earned her bachelor's degree in sociology from the University of California, Berkeley, and she holds a master's degree in public administration. Chris Kwok, who's another panelist of ours, he majored in government and minored in Asian American Studies as a student at Cornell University in New York. He earned his JD, though, from UCLA Law School, where he focused on critical race studies. He was also an editor of the Asian American Pacific Islander Law Journal. Chris is a mediator, a community organizer who has been active in speaking about anti-Asian violence and harassment. He is the co-executive editor of a report authored by the Asian American Bar Association of New York and Paul Weiss, titled "A Rising Tide of Hate and Violence Against Asian Americans in New York During COVID-19, the Impact, Cause, and Solution." Karen Umemoto, who's also a panelist, is the Helen and Morgan Chou Endowed Director, Chair of the UCLA Asian American Studies Center. She received her master's degree in Asian American Studies from UCLA, her PhD in Urban Studies from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Professor Umemoto's research centers on issues of democracy and social justice and multicultural societies with a focus on U.S. cities. Her research and practice thus takes a broad view of planning in the context of social inclusion, participatory democracy, and political transformation. And our other panelist, Natalie Cho, is an American college basketball player for the UCLA Bruins of the Pac-12 Conference, otherwise known as the Conference of Champions. Growing up in Plano, Texas, she was named the first Asian American to make a USA basketball team and was selected for the McDonald's All-American team as a high school senior in 2016. Recently, Natalie, you've probably seen her, she's been featured on ESPN. She's also had an article in the LA Times. She really speaks her voice. She is currently completing her master's in transformative coaching and leadership in the School of Education at UCLA. We're really pleased to have her. And then lastly, I'd like to introduce our moderator who will take us through the rest of the program today, Professor David K. Yu. Professor Yu is Vice Provost of the UCLA Institute of American Cultures and Professor of Asian American Studies and History. He's been a Senior Fulbright Scholar, a Fellow of the American Council on Education, and a recipient of the Hoshidi Distinguished Teaching Prize here at UCLA. His community involvement includes serving on many boards, and particularly the board of the Korean American Scholarship Foundation. And he also formerly served on the Little Tokyo Service Center. At this time, I'd like to welcome our controller, State Controller Betty Yee. Would you please come to the screen, please?
Thank you very much, Dr. Alexander, and thank you and Dr. Turner for making this event possible today. I'm honored to kick off this Distinguished Speaker Series in this 50th year of the UCLA Academic Advancement Program. And I know for all of us that are sharing this afternoon with all of you listening and watching, this is a time that has been very troubled for the AAPI community. And while the conversations that we will have today are important, I think all of us are working with every ounce of energy that we have to move each of us to a place of where our AAPI sisters and brothers, our aunties and uncles, our gongongs and pawpaws, to a place where we don't have to live in fear, where we are safe, where we are respected, and where we are valued. I want to thank, really before we start the program, just so many who are doing such significant work in this arena. And first and foremost, organizations like Stop AAPI Hate for its collaborative and transformative work to create visibility and support for what has been a virus for far too long affecting the AAPI community, and that is the virus of hate. I want to acknowledge the allyship of so many communities who have stood with the AAPI community, understanding that it requires solidarity to fight hate. I want to uplift the work of our community leaders and our elected leaders who have been consistent voices in this fight and who have implemented programs to ensure the protection and safety, particularly of our elders and other vulnerable persons in the AAPI community. Programs from volunteer shopping services and companion programs to bystander training programs and more. You know, throughout the course of the history of our diverse AAPI communities, hate and discrimination have marked our journeys. What we are experiencing today is not new. What is new and hopeful is our collective power, political, economic, social, generation, and personal power to fight hate and discrimination. Yeah, at the root of hate is ignorance, and myths like AAPIs being the model minority fuel that ignorance. So our work near term must not only be about safeguarding and protecting our community members from violence and threat. It is about staying silent no more. It is about how we, the AAPI diaspora, define our lived experiences that are marked by struggle and many challenges to the human condition. We ought not settle for how others define us. Our collective stories and personal journeys define us. And that is why I'm pleased that during this very, very challenging time, that in the California State Controller's Office, my team has come together to really make a commitment to build and to promote a more inclusive workplace, to understand what racial equity and justice means for each of our diverse communities, and more importantly, to provide safe spaces to have these conversations. We are grateful to all of the public figures who have helped give voice to our stories, our authentic stories that are free of biases, that are so important to creating the safe spaces we all need to connect, to listen, to speak out, to respect one another, to heal. And I'm just so pleased that with the panel here today, you will see that it is so many disciplines that are a part of this, this challenge of how we speak out, and particularly the role of sports in the social justice movement that is gaining more and more prominence. You know, we have a lot of work to do going forward, but as I said, I am hopeful. You know, the healing work that we must all do will challenge us to come to grips with how we view others. Yes, beginning with how we see each other within the API community, but more importantly, how we regard those outside our community, checking and working through our internalized oppressions. And this will take time, but I am hopeful. And it is difficult to be optimistic when our community faces harm and threat every single day. And why I'm hopeful is that more than ever, and together, and in solidarity and in allyship with our diverse neighbors, we have the power not only to fight this virus of hate, but to heal from it as well. And so I'm just so grateful for programs like this that continue the conversation, that showcase the work that is being done in every realm of our lives and in our communities. And that's really feature and showcase the voices that are coming from every possible corner of our communities, whether it's from our athletes, whether it's from our legal community who have been just champion advocates throughout this whole period of seeing hate and threats being hurled every day at our community. Looking at our educational community, particularly UCLA and our public university system, where frankly, if we're going to combat ignorance, our public education system is right at the core of that work. And so I am hopeful today as we listen to our panelists, but also know that this work is about really not only changing minds and hearts, but about really lending voice to our own lived experiences to showcase the tremendous diversity that I still believe is our greatest strength, not only here in California, but across our nation. Happy to be here with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you again, Controller Yee. We appreciate you being present today. We know that you have such a busy life and schedule, and your commitment to be a part of this program and being present means so much to us. So thank you again for being here today. At this time, I'd like to turn the program over to our moderator, Professor David Yee.
Thank you, Dr. Alexander, and congratulations to AAP on its 50th anniversary and for the incredible work that AAP has been doing, continues to do at UCLA and our communities. I'm also grateful for the longstanding partnership between AAP and the Institute of American Cultures, our Ethnic Studies Centers. As we know, the month of May is Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, a time of recognition and celebration. But the sharp increase in violence and hate over the past year or so has been deeply troubling. While these events may seem new or recent, unfortunately, they have much longer roots, dating back at least to the gold rush, when violence and discriminatory laws were aimed at the Chinese, and then those patterns were extended to other Asian and Pacific Islander groups. Of course, those patterns are linked to the larger experiences of Indigenous, Black, and Latino peoples. And so I think we need to think about these events within a larger framework. And yet violence and racism have never been the full story, as individuals and communities and allies have resisted, fought, and struggled. And so those stories need to be remembered and told, even as new ones emerge. And as part of that process, I'm really thankful that we today have Bruins who are going to be speaking about their journeys, and for us together to have a larger conversation. And so to begin that process, let me ask Chris Kwok to get things kicked off. So Chris.
Hi, everybody. It wouldn't let me unmute myself, but now I am fully unleashed. So, it's really wonderful to be here with people from California and specifically people from UCLA. Because as a college student in New York, I minored in Asian American Studies, and so many of the writers and thinkers that I admired were at UCLA. Kimberly Crenshaw, Mary Matsuda, wrote things that absolutely blew my mind. And I knew I needed to be here in order to continue my education. The Asian American Studies Center had many people that also influenced me and I admired, and I wanted to be like them. I looked at the alums of the law school, like Stuart Quo, and I wanted to be like them. And I didn't see a lot of people like them in New York, so I came all the way out to LA, and I'm so glad I did. I started law school in 1997, and it took a while for the education and the people and all the things that I learned when I was at UCLA. But in the end, it's been absolutely critical in terms of the community, in terms of the leadership that I've been able to engage in New York. Because California, and particularly UCLA, I think has always been at the forefront of racial justice. And building allies and learning from the African-American freedom struggle in this country. And then in particular, the African-American student athletes who came through UCLA, achieved great success academically and athletically, and used that platform to change society for the better. And that has inspired me at every turn. And I got back involved a little bit in New York through the Arthur Ashe legacy, because Arthur Ashe achieved, some of his greatest renown at the U.S. Open in New York. And so I'd love to get back into that later, but I think that's enough for me now. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. And I'm going to now ask Karen Umemoto if she can share with us.
Yes, thank you. And thanks to Dr. Alexander and the AAP staff for organizing today's program. For those of you who've experienced or witnessed an attack recently, or have a friend or relative who has, I know that this problem hits home more closely. One of my colleagues here at UCLA was Zoom bombed with a death threat in the chat soon after the Atlanta shootings, and he's still a bit shaken by that. But even if one hasn't experienced this directly, random acts of racial violence are particularly serious because they have the effect of instilling community-wide fear. They can trigger past trauma, and they send a message of exclusion that certain people don't belong here, something very antithetical to our vision of an inclusive society. So it's important to us to maybe now just take a deep breath, a body check, because events or news of events like this can affect us physically and emotionally. And there's a whole field of research on the relationship between racism and health that's very real. As a research university, we know how to understand problems and to devise ways to address them. One slogan of UCLA is "Knowledge Solves." And I look forward to sharing ideas about how we can solve this problem or address this problem of anti-Asian hate with my distinguished fellow panelists, Chris and Natalie. So thank you.
Thank you, Karen. And it's my pleasure now to ask Natalie Cho to speak with us.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you, everyone, for taking the time out of your day to join us. in our conversation that has such a huge impact on our lives. I'm Natalie Cho. I'm on the UCLA women's basketball team, and I'm currently completing my master's in the School of Education in Transformative Coaching and Leadership. And so what attracted me to UCLA was just being able to receive such a prestigious degree at the #1 public university in the country while playing basketball at the highest level. And so for me, that was just the best of both worlds. And something that I noticed while being recruited about the players who came out of the program in the past years was just how uncommon and well-rounded they are. I think the women's basketball program is the best at developing the whole person, not just the woman. Not just the student or the athlete, it's the whole woman and who you are becoming, especially during your college years. It's just so important because that's what launches you into the rest of your life. And so this development of the whole person was what really kickstarted me into speaking out against the anti-Asian racism this past year. Not to say, like my other fellow panelists have mentioned, that racism or hate crimes against Asians in the past wasn't a thing. It's definitely been rooted in our history in this country. And so I just think that it's more publicized and undeniable now. So back when quarantine had first started, March of 2020, government officials began using harmful rhetoric such as Chinese virus and Kung flu to refer to COVID. And so this put our community, my community, and those who look like me in a dangerous position of xenophobia as it increased around the country and ultimately the whole world. And at the time, I didn't see many people speaking up about the racism Asian Americans were dealing with, just a handful of Asian celebrities and activists. So I decided to compose a tweet that addressed the situation. And I knew that I was really blessed with the platform that I had as a student athlete at UCLA and definitely wanted to use it for change and for good. So I tweeted about it. I talked about my experiences, and yeah, it was soon picked up by like ESPN and the LA Times. I wanted to get the message out and to build awareness of what was happening to my community and for people to understand and empathize what other groups were going through. And this fight continues on today. As hate crimes continue to increase, I'm even more motivated to be a voice that my community needs. And so speaking out against racism and Asian hate did not come as easy as I wish it would have at the beginning. All of my life, I've heard the phrase like, shut up and dribble, and that I'm a basketball player, so I only talk about basketball things. And I've even been part of programs that had rules against the players talking about anything political. So when I had the idea of speaking up, for myself and my family, my community, I first wanted to run it past my teammates and coaches at UCLA. And honestly, their support was so overwhelming. I know that I have a Bruin family behind me in everything that I do. Coach Corey, my head coach, had said that this was my story and it deserves to be heard by everyone. And so I'm really lucky to have a leader who encourages me and also my teammates to be all who we are and to pursue every identity that we have. And so historically, UCLA student athletes have been in the forefront of activism and social justice, from Jackie Robinson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Jackie Joyner-Kersee, and Arthur Ashe. These past Bruins have been the face of change in their given facets of social justice. And in my opinion, I believe that the same can be said about the UCLA student athletes today. I believe that the whole athletic department and student athlete community are leading the charge when it comes to activism and social justice in this country. Groups such as BSAA, which stands for Black Student Athlete Alliance, have formed, where student athletes of all backgrounds can come together and continue the conversation. On the UCLA women's basketball team, we have a leadership group called MTAD, which stands for More Than a Dream, where their mission is to sculpt a culture in which everyone feels safe, seen, and heard, regardless of race, identity, or background. And I've honestly never felt more included than I do at UCLA. And so today, we are working towards creating a group that is supportive of Asian American student athletes. It would be a safe space for AAPI students to come together and speak about their experiences and continue our conversation. And I think UCLA is just so unique in the way that both the athletic department and the whole student body is so diverse, and having this community will help unite us even more and lead the charge. So that's a little bit about me and what I'm doing. And so thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Natalie, for sharing your story or part of your story with us. And I'd like to ask now all the panelists to come back onto the screen so that we can have a collective conversation. And I know that there will be, for those in the who are attending today, if you could place your questions in the Q&A, then we can take some of those. But while we're waiting for those to come in, I did want to ask a question to, as Natalie shared about her own experiences in speaking out about racism, I wanted to see if Karen and Chris might have some perspectives as well about your experiences. I know that both of you have been speaking quite a bit in different, contexts, and if you could share a little bit about your own experiences in doing that, maybe some lessons that you learned or things along the way that you could share with us.
Yeah, I'll go first. Thank you, Professor. So as an attorney, as a mediator, I worked at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission in the New York District Office. So I was very lucky to work in the federal government dealing with race, another byproduct of the Civil Rights Movement and the Civil Rights Act. And so I remembered that. I was grateful that I was able to be paid and do that and to use my education, cutting edge education that still doesn't really exist on the East Coast 25 years out, which is really sad. And so that's why coming to LA, coming to UC has always been like going into the future for me. I always knew that and I always felt it. And then I come back and I'm like, okay, I grew up here in New York and I like it, it's okay. But then I always felt like whenever I go to California, it's the future. And definitely for Asian Americans, it's both our past and our future, And it took a long time before anyone cared about the stuff that we talk about in ethnic studies class or critical race studies class became part of this national conversation. And it has happened for me, like just this year, which is incredible. So talking about these things within media nationally and internationally, outside of our classes, was a real education for me because we always figured people didn't know you were part of the community, but now you're like, oh, I know for sure. And I know how much you don't know. And now I have to be out there to constantly talk about it. And that's for the outside or for the mainstream society. And then also for our community, we also have to educate ourselves. Not every single person who comes through UCLA or Berkeley does take an ethnic studies class or understands it. So this is an opportunity both internally and externally. And now we have so many new initiatives that's being funded in ways that have never been funded before. Asian American nonprofits have always kind of limped along, sort of asking for money. UCLA Study Center has done a great job in the last 50 years, not without its challenges. But to have endowed chairs for the first time recently within the last decade, I teach as an adjunct at CUNY, City University of New York in Hunter, and it has the same history in terms of the time because that's when the Asian American Studies movement started. But we certainly don't have the same institutional, heft. But I'll just stop there.
Karen, did you want to respond to that?
Sure. No, and I appreciate your enthusiasm about UCLA. I feel the same thing. I'm a Bruin, true blue Bruin, I guess you can call it. And it really was a transformative experience in the most positive ways. So I really connect with what you said, Chris and Natalie. One of the things that I've been speaking about, or when I've been speaking, I've come to understand how much confusion, fear, and anxiety there is out there about anti-Asian hate, especially for people who've experienced it personally or have friends or relatives who have. And so one of the things that I've started to do is to share this metaphor that people said it's helpful, so I trust that they're not lying to me. But let me share it with you now. And, scholars are always looking for metaphors, right? That kind of summarize the nature of the problem and then that lead you to finding solutions to the problem. So here on my screen, on my Zoom background is this, do you remember from Smokey the Bear days, this kind of fire triangle where what does it take to start a fire? Because really this has been a firestorm of hate across the country. So you need fuel, heat, and oxygen. And if we look at what's happened over the past year, we have a lot of fuel, right? We have this pandemic, we have families in crisis and fear. We have this highly jingoistic trade war with China that kind of bleeds into, this whole China virus idea. We have a weak public health and mental health system. And we have proliferation of so many deadly weapons in this country, right? All of that layered upon these misperceptions of Asian Americans as either the model minority, right? The model minority, people who don't feel the pain in the same way, or the perpetual foreigner that brings in disease and other problems and really who don't belong here. So you have this fuel, right? This underlying fuel, this underbrush of fuel. And then you have heat, right? When Natalie talked about the term Chinese virus, you could see actually empirically what happened after those words were uttered and the increase in the use of the hashtag Chinese virus and the amount, right? Half of those tweets contained anti-Asian sentiments in there. And this was, studied by a colleague of mine in the School of Public Health. And then we had oxygen, right? We had all the social media proliferating in the ether about how Asians are, right, to blame. Chinese are to blame for the pandemic and all of that. So you had all three, ingredients of that perfect firestorm that then took place. But metaphors also point to solutions, right? So how do you clear the underbrush? How do you lower the temperature? How do you shift the winds in ways that lead to some solutions? So, everything, so if you look at that, go back to that list, right? If we could help address kind of the level of fear, if we educate people about who we are, who Asian Americans are really, the diversity amongst us, the richness, the contributions, and develop more empathy, right, throughout the country about who Asian Americans are and Asian Americans ourselves, as well as address these issues of guns, of our broken mental health and public health system, and the level of extreme poverty, right, and homelessness and all of those things that we're facing right now. So, because really, Asians are being scapegoated for a lot of these problems, and until we're able to address those problems, that tendency of scapegoating won't completely go away. After the 9/11 attacks and the period of anti-Muslim scapegoating, I mean, that went on for 2 years. So we're in it for the long haul. And I'm really so glad to be with all of you together here so that we can, begin to do more of that power building as Controller Yee talked about to address the problem.
Thanks, Karen. And I think you both raised some really important points. Natalie, I wanted to ask if, I know that when you tweeted and stood up there for speaking out, I'm assuming that you also, I know you got a lot of support from your teammates and others, but I'm assuming that you also, it wasn't all positive in terms of what was happening, right? And so I didn't know if you wanted to share a lot about how you were able to navigate some of that resistance and things that came up. And that could also go to both Karen and Chris as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember back when I was having the idea of saying something and talking to my sister, I was like, oh my gosh, this, like, I've never spoken up any like at this about anything. If anyone like knows me, all my friends and my family, they know that I'm like the quiet one. And like I really fall into like that model minority like stereotype. And I was like, I can't do that anymore. And so I would talk to my sister and she's like, because you have this platform, you have to, like, it's kind of your duty to stand up for yourself. And like learning from my teammates who are Black, and that's like how you really love yourself. It's to stand up for yourself and speak out, even though it's like really uncomfortable. But yeah, I definitely knew that because it's so political and just so controversial, like I would have like both positive and negative responses. But I think one thing that sports has really taught me is to just like keep it all in the inner circle, like just interact with your teammates and your coaches and just like your close family and supporters, because everyone's going to have opinions. So over the years, like I've really like learned not to always check social media, not always check what people are writing about me. And so I'm really glad that I had like that prior training before all of this. But yeah, I definitely had some like negative feedback, but I honestly didn't really pay attention to that. I'm just really grateful for my supporters and also my close friends and family who always had my back in everything that I did.
It's great. Thank you.
It's the quiet ones that always have the most strength, and I was thinking when you were talking to your sister, when Arthur Ashe, before he won the US Open, he was talking to his brother. He and his brother were very close, and his brother supported him and made his career possible in many ways. And Arthur Ashe got a good draw at the US Open, and he's like, I think I can do this. I think I can win it, and his brother was like, yeah, you can. And when you have that platform, you're going to use it and you're going to speak out. And I remember like watching that documentary, listening, I was like, wow, number one, what a brother. Number two, that's amazing. They were like, we're going to do this, we're going to win, and then you're going to use it. And I remembered, like I was volunteering at the US Open at the Arthur Ashe, sort of booth. And I was like, that's inspiring. Like, this is 2019, and I remember just taking quiet moments to learn from the examples of people that inspire me. Right. And then remind you that like whatever society tells you is like, who cares? Like, I'm going to be me. Like in some ways, like when we're subject to these prevailing winds, one of the strengths is to be who we are. Right. Like that sounds kind of terrible, but it is true. We are subject. We're changed by what we're supposed to be. But like once we can block that out, and learn from your teammates, right? And it's so wonderful to hear that. And I do think that this institution in particular allows that. So I was so inspired by what you wrote. I read it. I was like, dang, when I was your age, I couldn't write half that. I couldn't say half that. I couldn't be half that. I wasn't even close. Like literally I was like pathetic. Like, it took me 25 years to get to a point where I was half reasonably, publicly speaking, but yeah.
Karen, did you want?
I hear you, Chris, and I'm amazed by all of our students at UCLA and elsewhere. I think we've come a long way. And I just wanted to echo what Chris said, and also, just touch on what Natalie said. I mean, Natalie, I think your power is in your passion, right? And one of the things that I learned is that, I used to be like very mousy, and I would get so nervous when I spoke, like my head would shake, uncontrollably, right? And then now, being a professor, you're forced to speak all the time. But one of the things that I found is that if you speak from that place of passion and compassion, then it's so much easier, and it's so much easier to even talk about difficult subjects, because a lot of Asian families have a hard time talking about difficult subjects. We don't confront each other, even if something's bothering us. And then, in kind of the larger world of kind of different racial and other social dynamics, sometimes we don't speak up, right? Even when something's bothering us. But I think if we could learn to rely on our, in Hawaii, I taught in Hawaii for 22 years, but talk about your na'au, right? Your gut, right? If you speak from your gut through your heart, right? As opposed to just thinking just from up here, then there's so much more that we have, right? We have to say, we have to share, but we share it with compassion. And when we share with compassion, people are able to listen a lot more clearly. So just wanted to like give you kudos for what you're doing, and also just add, you know, a little lesson along the way as well. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just like learning so much. I'm glad this is being recorded so I can listen back onto everything. But I think one thing that I've definitely learned over this past year is like, that's really how you love yourself. Is to stand up for yourself, even though like it's really uncomfortable. And that's, like I had said earlier, that's what I learned from my teammates. That's how you truly love yourself and also your family and your community, and just by speaking out and stuff. Yeah.
Thank you. We do have a question in the question box, and it says, it seems that part of the problem lies in the fact that many Americans are culturally ignorant. Our educational systems, including the K through 12 and tertiary sector, do not all require students to receive multicultural education. What can we do to encourage all of our educational systems to incorporate more inclusive education into the curricular mix? It would be nice to see multicultural electives incorporated into the GEs for undergrad students here at UCLA and beyond. So how about if our panelists, you know, take up that? I know, Karen, you've been doing a lot of work around K through 12.
Yeah, sure. You know, it's amazing. Ethnic studies and Asian American studies have been around for over 50 years, but nationally, only 23 or 24, less than 25 programs have actual degrees, minors, majors, masters, PhDs in Asian American studies, 20 out of thousands and thousands of universities. On top of that, there's so much rich scholarship that's been produced, right? There's been so much knowledge production on Asian Americans over the past 5 decades, but most of that sits behind paywalls, right, of libraries and publishers. So one of the things that we're trying to do is really support the efforts to build and advocate for ethnic studies in graduation requirements, right, in K through 12 systems and CSU, Cal State systems, UC systems. And one of the things that we're finding is that a lot of people aren't prepared to teach Asian American studies because people haven't been trained in it. So we have a project that we're just getting ready to launch called the AAPI multimedia textbook. We want to produce a multimedia textbook online, freely accessible to anyone, with the with the latest knowledge about Asian Americans that anyone, anywhere can use in the world. So that there's, you know, there's no excuse for schools to say, you know, we can't do this because we don't have the materials, we can't buy the books, or we don't have the teachers. I mean, we want to do teacher trainings around this textbook once it's done. And we're really excited about this. And we never felt more urgency to do this than now. So.
Great.
I think about some of the great graduates of UCLA that took classes in ethnic studies or graduated in ethnic studies. I think about Ellie Wong. And when I watched her comedy, you know, first I laughed, but then I thought, oh my God, that's an Asian American studies class. Like I could see the Asian American studies class in her comedy. And I think that was so beautiful because I'm like, that's the long tail of her education. She's gonna make millions, it's great. But she's also telling a story from that perspective, of a critical perspective, that she could only get if she had a time to be taught that and to be in that. And I thought that is the power of this institution. That is the power of that kind of critical thinking, you know, knowing that I was able to minor in it. And I didn't think about sort of Cornell for 20 years. And I turned back and I said, let me go back and see what they're doing. I'm sure they have a major. And I turned back and it's like, nothing has changed in 25 years. And I was like, oh man, it's really sad, you know. And I think that's the, the power of the institutions, particularly at Berkeley and UCLA, and what they did with the ethnic studies and the majors. And we need to sort of support that more and realize the amazing impact it's had.
If I could put in a plug for Institute of American Cultures and our Ethnic Studies Centers are also doing a pilot right now with the School of Education where Natalie is attending. We've been in conversations about working together, and we've been piloting a teacher training program as well as an open resource program. And so I think it's really promising. And I think that, as you know, the CSU system has recently passed an ethnic studies requirement. And I think that the state of California will probably do that eventually. And so I think that the research that our faculty are doing are going to be really a part of that translation process to help build that content that we do want to get out there to teachers and to families and communities. Really, as Karen was saying, we want to really make it open access so that anybody who has internet access can get these resources. And so that work is happening. So it's exciting. It takes some time, but I think that I think the future looks very promising in that regard. We have another question. Given the very public stereotypes that are floated by the media about Black, Brown, and AAPI folks, what are the keys to forming the coalitions that will help us to combat the rampant hate that has and is being spread by national leaders and white supremacists? All right. Would one of you or all of you like to try to take that on?
I'm sorry if you can hear the screaming baby, but it's really important to know the history of ethnic studies, to know the history of America, and a lot of the history that's been erased. And we need to know where Asian American studies was inspired by the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, that we rode on the shoulders of freedom fighters that fought before we got here, that fought while we were here, and that fought after. And so we can talk about unity, but we also need to talk about like why that's important and how we should work together, and how narratives about Black versus Asian has elements of truth, but distracts us from the real fight about institutional racism, about white supremacy. So if we understand that these are distractions, we can understand our place in American society and history better, so that we can engage in a fight. Just like Natalie, her teammates had her back. And Natalie, as an Asian American athlete in this country, I think you exist in a very special space, kind of like how Jeremy Lin existed. You're Asian in a Black space, like sort of in the team where there's many African Americans, and then there's a larger society which is like white, right? And so you're experiencing different sort of like communities, and I think you're much richer because of it.
Yeah, definitely. Just to speak on that, I still kind of struggle with it sometimes, but just the idea of like imposter syndrome and not being able to see people who look like me. I mean, I did have Jeremy Lin and Yao Ming growing up, but other than that, basketball wise, I didn't really see people who looked like me playing at the level that I dreamed to. And so growing up, basketball is a predominantly Black and white sport, and so being like one of the only Asians like on the court was just like I did have that imposter syndrome. But yeah, one thing that I think would be really helpful is just to keep the conversation of all of the minorities in this country's story, past and histories going. I learned, like I said before, like I've learned so much from my Black teammates and their experiences, and how that affects me, and how that can push me towards being a voice for the AAPI community as well. And so just being always open to learning other communities and other minority stories and what they've been through as well.
And let me also add to what both Natalie and Chris said in response to the question. We're doing a study of hate crimes in Los Angeles County with 17 years of data. And so I see the actual information that people are filing with the police department, at least some of it. And it is true, hate is being spewed in all directions. And when we talk about stopping anti-Asian hate, I think it's important for us to say that in the spirit of stopping all acts of hate against everybody, because everybody's feeling this. And I think especially at this time, there's so many people, right, feeling so much pain for so many different reasons. And I think that racial solidarity across all kind of lines of intersection, religious, gender identity, and other geography, is really important at this time. And I don't think in that what's going on now, the kind of vile that we're seeing against African Americans is part of the same stream of racism that we're feeling as Asian Americans. And it's important to make those kinds of connections. But it's also important to understand how Asian Americans, like Chris said, have always been kind of used as the wedge, right? The model minority myth has always been used as a wedge between Black and other, Black and other people of color and the white community. Because people say, well, Asians have made it, why can't you, right? Or people say that Asians are proximal to whites in ways that we don't share similar experiences with other people of color. So I think this gets to a very complicated, all the complexities of race relations that we're seeing today. But I think it's really important to keep the eyes on the prize, and which is no hate, no hate, right? And let's build solidarities across all color lines.
Like the danger of the Black versus Asian sort of narrative within the current climate is for it to subsume everything else. If we look at the narrative about the LA riots, it's always going to get stuck in sort of like Blacks versus Koreans or Blacks versus Asians. But that takes us from that main sort of, what was that about? That was the acquittal of the 4 police officers and the institutional nature of racism. It's not to dismiss that there are, these attacks, so let's not ignore that, but it's not the main narrative. One of the narratives that never get talked about, I live close to New York City, Chinatown, and the Saturday after the Atlanta shootings, I'm 47, I never saw so many Black people in Chinatown, in New York City, Chinatown. They were just there in support. It was very quiet. They're just walking around. I saw them in restaurants. I talked to my friends who are shop owners. They noticed it too. These kind of things will not be reported within it. Like lots of Black people in Chinatown just chilling, hanging out, supporting, showing like, I got your back. Those things kind of don't make the news. But if you're quiet and you observe and you just show up, you're like, what's happening? Oh, they're just showing we're here. We know what you're going through. We want to tell you we're here. And so those messages are just as much of the narrative, but they will not get played out in our social media and our larger mainstream narrative in the same way.
Yeah, and just one accent point on that. A lot of Asians feel that they're being attacked mainly by African Americans, and that's not true. Empirically, that's not true, and we really have to fight that stereotype. I think some of the videos that went viral happen to have African Americans in them, but that's not reflective of the range of the kinds of attacks that are really taking place.
Thank you for that. I think you all have been kind of answering a question that's come in that has talked about not only white supremacy, but the fact that there can be acts that are perpetrated by groups to one another, groups of color to one another. And I know that that can be a difficult or sensitive topic, but I do think that it's probably part of an honest conversation that we have, because we know that within the AAPI community, for example, there have been, ways in which our communities have sometimes, reflected these larger kinds of issues in terms of how race relations get played out. And so I think that is something that we do need to be kind of wrestling with. But as I think all of you have been mentioning, to kind of think about the larger structures and the frameworks in which to think about those things.
The legacy of our law in California, People versus Hall, there was a statute that said if you were a Native American, Black, you could not testify against a white person in court. And when the Chinese came and there was a Chinese person killed by a white robber, that person's conviction, that white person's conviction for murder was overturned because there was a Chinese witness. What that meant was that if you're a non-white, you were at the mercy of violence and harassment and killing. So I think that affected, to this very day, how non-whites are protected or not protected by the law, And I think we should wrestle with that legacy and be aware of it so that we can be careful that it doesn't sort of subvert our thinking.
Well, and People versus Hall was obviously, as you know, building on the laws that rendered, testimony inadmissible that was extended. I mean, that was originally around Native Americans and African Americans, right? Yeah, and it was extending that. So I think that that's an important point. Another question that came up, I think, has to do with ethnic studies scholarship, being how much of it's being incorporated into a general education requirement, recognizing the understanding of our larger diverse cultural reality in the US and globally. So I guess that question is really asking about how much of it is really being incorporated, ethnic studies scholarship is being incorporated into the general ed requirement. Do any of you, I mean, I guess, Karen, since you're the faculty member, I'll pick on you.
Yeah, we do have not an ethnic studies requirement, but a diversity requirement. I think, though, that what's really significant right now is that there's a movement for ethnic studies in California, at least, and I'm not sure if it's really caught on in other states, but the California State Legislature passed a bill that will require ethnic studies graduation requirement in all high schools in California. The CSU system will be implementing an ethnic studies graduation requirement within the CSUs as well. And they're trying to get, I know that there's a movement to try to get ethnic studies graduation requirement at the community colleges as well. I don't know how far along that is, but it's raising a lot of questions about who has the qualifications to teach, right, ethnic studies, who's going to provide the teacher education to equip teachers to teach ethnic studies, and then what kinds of materials are going to be available for this. So I think we're at kind of a watershed moment. And I think UCLA because UCLA has the largest hub of ethnic studies faculty across all of the departments, right? And across all of the disciplines in the entire nation. We are so well positioned to play a leadership role in providing these kinds of materials, right? That are kind of vetted by scholars, so that we know it's accurate, we know it reflects cutting edge research and knowledge in the field. And I think, I'm hoping that, we'll get more support to be able to do this. I'm really excited about this project.
Yeah, and I would just echo or repeat the partnership that we have with the School of Education, and in particular, they have a Center X there that is doing a lot of this great work already through the teacher education program, and they have a Center for History and Geography, and so some of our colleagues there they have this kind of expertise that we can kind of combine together to be able to do that work. So that's really great and hopeful. Let's see. I guess another question along those lines is, it says, Dr. Umemoto, I'm excited to learn about your multimedia project for K through 12. How can we stay informed about the progress and rollout? I would like to discuss it within school districts like Manhattan Beach Unified School District.
Yeah, our project, we're just starting, we're raising funds. We're starting the prototype curriculum. We're going to come out on June 1st with a sample curriculum for 4th grades through college on anti-Asian hate as one kind of chapter of this larger storybook. We're calling this the multimedia textbook, but then each chapter will be like a storybook. So we want to cover everything from Asian immigration to labor history, women's history, different moments in history that deal with exclusion, incarceration, and organizing for social justice and things like that. So we have kind of an inventory of topics, of themes, of learning outcomes, and all of that. So so if anyone wants to support us in that, please let me know. But we're hoping that we get something, a first edition of a digital textbook out towards the end of next year.
Thank you. And I guess that was a clarification. It was for this person's children's school district in Manhattan Beach Unified. Okay, so thank you for that.
Yeah, and ours is more for a high school, college, but there are other curricula, a lot of different people providing curricula that I'm happy to share with you.
Great. There was another comment from an anonymous attendee that says, on behalf of the African American community, I'm extremely sorry to see what the AAPI community has suffered at the hands of some of the members of our community. I have love for you and grieve with you and support you. And I wholeheartedly, seem to have lost the string, but I do think that one of those, I mean, I have a question that I was going to ask all of you as we kind of, I know starting to run out of time, but I guess what inspires you and gives you hope despite the difficulties that we face? I know that each of you have kind of touched on that a little bit already, but just thought it might be good in terms of thinking about those kinds of issues about where do we go from here?
The moment that we're in as an Asian American community is historic, and it's a chance for change. And I think that 2021 will be rough. I don't think the anti-Asian incidents and harassment and violence will go away. But I think that the work that can be done, the community that is being built, the young people that are coming out like Natalie, telling your story, being your true authentic self, encourages connections and reveals stories and reveals our humanity. And so that gives me a lot of hope. And that I think there's money and organizations and people, and UCLA is going to be at the forefront. So it gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah, I just think that having this conversation right now just gives me hope that we were able to talk about this and just come together as a community and speak about our experiences. And I mean, like, I don't think this has ever like happened before. Like so many people bringing awareness to all hate. Yeah, and like this time in history has never like happened. And so just being able to see these conversations continuing, and like my teammates and also friends and even strangers like asking about my experiences and everything that I've been through just gives me a lot of hope and encouragement to continue speaking for my family and my community.
And I just want to add that it's people like Natalie who inspire me. You know, really, Natalie, you're setting a great example for other young people, and you're joining so many young people in standing up and standing together. So maybe it's because, you know, the closer we get to retirement age, the more we're looking to leadership, you know, from the younger generation. And I'm really inspired that that we're seeing that, and we're seeing all of you be able to do even more than we were able to do, you know, at that age, right? At that phase of life or stage of life. So I think the social media savvy, the education and grounding in ethnic studies, the foundation in all the community organizations that have been part of this movement and who have stepped up in this movement, and to all of the wonderful people who are in positions of power like Betty, who have lent institutional support for these movements. I think it's just a very different time than it was, say, in the 1960s or 70s. And so that always gives me hope that, that there'll be change.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to think about the fact that, for example, our AAP is celebrating 50 years this year, and our institute and our ethnic studies centers celebrated 50 years in 2019, a couple of years ago, of course, dating back to 1969 when our centers were founded. And I think about back at what was going on in our society and culture at that time. And I think some of the folks here have talked about some of the student athletes and and the platforms that they use. And I think both Chris and Natalie have talked about that, and how now we're in this one situation now, and it's, I think this is kind of a historic time, obviously, not just because of the pandemic, but obviously that's part of it, but for what else is going on in society. So I think it is both a difficult time, but I think at the same time there are signs of hope. And I think that I do think that, like Natalie, what you and your classmates and peers are doing, I think is very encouraging and hopeful. I realize that we're almost out of time, and I think that we've been able to cover most of the questions either live, or I know that I think that some have been responded to in the chat or the Q&A space. So I think with that, do you have any last comments? Any last comments or thoughts from our panelists? Do any of you have a last comment or thought you want to share?
Good.
Just support AAP. You know, we didn't have AAP 50, over 50 years ago, right? We're celebrating the 50th anniversary, and the role that AAP plays is really vital for all underrepresented groups at UCLA. So I just want to give another shout out to AAP. Happy 50th anniversary. And for all of you on this webinar, yeah, please consider supporting AAP.
Yeah, absolutely. Just thank you so much for this opportunity to have this conversation. And I've just learned so much from both of y'all. So I'm just so thankful to just gain more knowledge and learn about y'all's experiences.
Thank you all. And I think we've been given a lot of food for thought and how we might be able to move forward in constructive ways to help build what I think Dr. King called the beloved community, in solidarity with one another. I'd like to really thank our panelists for your contributions today, and not just today, but all the work that you've been doing before and that you will be continuing to do. And also to thank all the people who came and spent time with us today. And again, to thank AAP. And I know that I think it started out, the program was called High Potential. And it certainly achieved its potential and then some, and look forward to the next 50 years of what AAP will be doing, not only on campus, but in our communities. And so I think I will now turn it back to Dr. Alexander, who I think will be closing us out.
Thank you, Professor Yu. This was an incredible panel presentation. The lessons learned, the voices heard, the stories told, the situations that people presented and evolved and emerged from is just quite remarkable. And a lot of things that we've shared with you today, I hope they're lessons that you'll take with you to continue this advocacy and to continue this fight for equity and justice as we deal in a society that we're going through so many different changes. But I wanted to thank the panelists, Chris Kwok, Natalie Cho, Karen Umemoto, and of course, Controller Betty Yee. Thank you so much for being a part of our 50th anniversary celebration in our speaker series. We cannot say enough in terms of your contribution to not only our commemorative ceremonies, but also to the work that you're doing in the community, both at large and within your respective communities. And so I want to thank you, and I want to thank our audience. Again, thank our I want to say our sponsors, but I'll call them our collaborators, in athletics, and all the other folks that have been contributors to this event. And especially a big shout out to Professor Turner for connecting us with Chris Kwok. Chris, welcome back to UCLA. We hope this is not your last time. We want you to come back and speak to us again. We really enjoyed your conversations this afternoon. We are now phasing out of this webinar, and I just again wanted to thank everyone There are people behind the scenes that, you know, I love you guys. I thank you very much because you do a fantastic job of doing the logistics for this. And you just don't know what goes into putting a program like this together. So I want to do a special shout out and thank you to those folks as well. So again, I want to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon, and I wish you all the best. And, you know, let's keep up the good fight and the good trouble. Thank you so much.